A couple of local cops thought they'd show me what a warm welcome was like in their town. They tied me to a lamp post in the middle of the street, putting on this little show, acting like I was just some nobody. They had no idea who they were messing with or how badly this was going to backfire on them. But let's rewind a bit, and I'll explain it all from the start. So here's the deal. My name's Danny, I'm 54, and I've been around the block a few times. Recently, I moved to this tiny, no-name town in South Carolina, ready to step up and take on the role of chief of police. This wasn't my first rodeo. I'd been through plenty of small towns and seen a lot in my time, but this place had a vibe unlike any other. Everyone knew each other, and they didn't exactly seem thrilled about new faces showing up. It didn't take long to figure out that the cops around here, they had their own rulebook, if you catch my drift. The way they carried themselves was different, and it wasn't exactly friendly. On my first day, before even reporting in, I decided to take a walk around town and see what I was dealing with. So there I was, blending in with my old cap and worn-out jacket, just another guy on the street. I stopped by this local cafe, the kind of place that looked like it had been around way longer than me. As soon as I walked in, though, I could feel a dozen pairs of eyes on me, sizing me up. 2 cops sitting in the corner were laughing about something, but I could tell it was all at my expense. They'd glance over at me, obviously deciding I was just some nobody, the kind of guy they'd ignore or, even worse, mess with. Their badges sparkled under the dim light, but their attitudes? Not so much. I ordered a coffee and tried to play it cool, just to see how they'd react. I wasn't planning to reveal who I was just yet. No, this was just me sizing up the situation. But just as I took my coffee to go, one of the cops, a tall guy, yelled across the room, "Hey old man, you lost or something? You sure don't look local." I barely turned to him and said, "Just passing through," but it was clear they weren't buying it. The tall guy with that smug grin shot back, "Well, maybe you should keep passing. Strangers like you don't last long around here, if you catch my drift." I just shrugged and walked out, but believe me, I could feel their eyes boring into my back the whole way down the street. I had a feeling this new job wasn't going to be just about paperwork and meetings. The next morning, I went for a run outside of town, just wanted to clear my head and get a better feel for the place. Nothing unusual at first, until halfway through my run, I heard the sound of a patrol car pulling up beside me. Yep, those same 2 cops from the cafe, Jake and Mike. Jake, the tall, wiry blonde with that smirk, leaned out the window and shouted, "Hey runner, you lost?" The way he said it made it sound like I'd just trespassed on someone's private property. Mike, his bulky partner, chimed in, "You sure you're welcome around here?" I slowed my pace and shot back, just going for a run. "Pretty sure that's still allowed around here, right?" Jake grinned, looking like he knew something I didn't. "Maybe it's allowed, but strangers don't exactly get the warmest welcome here, especially those who don't know our rules." Before I could even ask what rules they were talking about, both guys jumped out of the car. Jake got uncomfortably close and started patting me down, without even a "may I?" I stayed calm, but I could tell they were enjoying themselves. After a moment, Jake pulled out some random plastic scrap from my pocket and held it up like it was some twisted prize. Well, look what we have here," he sneered. "Is this yours?" I didn't flinch, just stared back at him, refusing to take the bait. By now, it was obvious this whole thing was a setup. But I knew I had to keep it together. They had no idea who I was, and this was definitely not the right time for me to reveal my identity. They grabbed my arms and dragged me through town, no questions, no explanations. It was like they thought I was some lost dog they'd found wandering the streets. They hauled me straight to the town square and tied me up to a big lamp post where people were going about their usual business. Some folks stopped and stared, others weren't even surprised, like they'd seen this act before. Jake and Mike started cracking jokes, like they were performing for an audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jake announced, giving an exaggerated bow, "we've got ourselves a real big city troublemaker here." Mike played along. "Yep, think he's got a few tricks up his sleeve, or maybe in his pockets." They tied my hands to the post with all the drama they could muster, making sure everyone could see. A few people pulled out their phones, recording the whole thing like it was the highlight of their day. Some chuckled, others just shook their heads. I could see Jake soaking it all in, flashing that disgusting smirk, enjoying every second of it. "Looks like we've got ourselves a troublemaker," he sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We can't have people like you just walking into our town." The whole thing was beyond ridiculous. It wasn't funny, it was downright disturbing. These guys were so into their little performance, they didn't even care how obviously fake it looked. I had to keep reminding myself to stay calm. Let them dig their own hole. I had to play the long game. There I was, tied to the lamp post like some kind of spectacle, while Jake and Mike strutted around like they'd just caught the biggest fish of the season. They didn't even try to keep it low-key. They were basking in the attention. Cameras were flashing everywhere, people were laughing, and a few were even genuinely curious, wondering who this outsider was and what was going on. By the next morning, that little stunt wasn't just a local secret anymore. Clips of the mysterious stranger tied to the pole started blowing up online. Comments were flooding in, and the theories started rolling. Some people thought I was a drifter who had crossed the wrong line. Others were straight up asking, who is this guy, and why does he look like he's stuck in some Wild West showdown? Local news stations caught wind of the whole thing and started showing up in force, ready to get their next big story. They were relentless, pushing through the crowd, asking everyone they could, did anyone see this guy commit a crime? The responses? A lot of shrugs and the occasional beats me. Looks like the cops are just having some fun. Meanwhile, Jake and Mike were still enjoying their moment, pacing around like they were celebrities. They posed for the cameras, cracked jokes, and made it a big scene. Little did they know, the story was spiraling out of their control. I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. They were giving me exactly what I needed, setting the stage for the real show, and they didn't even realize it. The spotlight was on, but not for long. After what felt like the longest night of my life, my phone rang early the next morning. Caller ID showed the main office. I knew exactly why they were calling. Word had gotten out, and they were not happy. The little prank these two had pulled had turned into a full-blown scandal, and now, Jake and Mike were about to get a wake-up call. I walked into the station calm and collected, my uniform sharp, my badge gleaming. This wasn't just any ordinary day. It was my moment to set things straight. As I stepped into the main hall, you could almost feel the tension in the air, like the calm before a storm. And sure enough, Jake and Mike walked in, laughing about some joke, not a care in the world. They hadn't even bothered to check who I was. They just assumed I was some nobody they could mess with. But when they saw me standing there, fully suited up in my uniform, their faces froze. I could see the shock spread across their expressions, turning quickly into panic. I let the silence stretch. They shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting around, clearly looking for a way out. Finally, I broke the silence, keeping my voice calm but firm. We've got ourselves a situation, gentlemen. Their faces drained of color as they realized the magnitude of what was happening. This was a scenario they hadn't scripted, a game they no longer controlled. Jake stumbled, trying to come up with an excuse, but I raised my hand to stop him. Save it, I said coldly. I've seen enough to know exactly what's been going on here. I took a step closer, locking eyes with them, and asked, so neither of you recognized your new chief of police? The room fell dead silent. Everyone else started to put two and two together. Jake and Mike? They stood frozen, trying way too hard to look confident, but their faces betrayed them. They were cornered, and they knew it. I pulled out my phone and hit play on the video from the day before. Their little performance, complete with all their smug grins and mocking comments. I held the phone up for everyone to see. In case anyone here is confused, I said, this is what went down. These two thought they'd have a little fun at the expense of some stranger, without even bothering to check who I was. The room went still. The shock in everyone's eyes quickly turned to disgust as they realized just how far Jake and Mike had taken things. Jake opened his mouth, probably to make some excuse, but then he did something I didn't expect. Instead of apologizing, he puffed up his chest, lifted his chin, and said, "Look, this is just how things work here. Tradition, you know. We have a little fun with the outsiders, keeps everyone in line." I raised an eyebrow. "Tradition?" I asked. "So, your tradition is to publicly humiliate people just because they're new in town?" Jake smirked, looking around the room for support. "It's not hurting anyone, just a bit of harmless fun." I glanced around the room. The rest of the team was watching, expressions a mixture of disbelief and discomfort. They were starting to realize just how deep this went. And for Jake and Mike, reality was sinking in. Their little tradition was about to come to an abrupt end. Without a word, I reached into my pocket, pulled out 2 termination forms, and signed them in front of everyone. "Jake, Mike, hand over your badges," I said coldly. "Your time here is done." The room was silent. No cheers, no applause, just a heavy, expectant silence. They took off their badges, faces pale, clearly realizing the gravity of what they'd done. It was clear as day, things were about to change.